The pill bottle slipped from Helena's hand and clattered across the bathroom tiles. She stared at it, motionless, her reflection fractured in the medicine cabinet mirror. A woman she no longer recognized, 65 years old. Widow, alone. The label on the bottle read, "Take one daily for anxiety," but she'd stopped reading labels weeks ago. She'd stopped reading anything. The newspaper still arrived each morning, piling up unread by the door. Mail accumulated on the kitchen counter. The world kept spinning, kept demanding, kept going, and she simply couldn't understand why. It had been 8 months since Richard died, 8 months since the funeral where everyone said the same hollow things, 8 months since their children flew back to their own lives in distant cities, leaving her in this too big house with its 2 quiet rooms and its too many memories. Helena bent down slowly, her knees protesting, and picked up the bottle. She set it back on the counter with deliberate care, then gripped the cold porcelain sink and looked at herself again. When did I become invisible? The thought arrived uninvited, but it wasn't wrong. She'd watched it happen gradually over the years, the way people's eyes would slide past her in grocery stores, the way waiters would address her children instead of her, the way the world had gently, politely, begun to pretend she wasn't quite there anymore. And now, without Richard beside her, she felt like she'd finally disappeared completely. She turned off the bathroom light and walked through the darkened hallway, her fingertips trailing along the wall where photographs hung in neat rows. Richard at 30, grinning on their honeymoon. Richard at 50, arm around their daughter at her wedding. Richard at 64, thinner than he should have been, smiling bravely at last year's Christmas dinner. The photographs stopped there. Helena paused at the last frame, an empty space where she'd meant to hang another picture but never had. She'd been waiting, she realized now, for life to give her something worth framing again. But life had other plans. She continued to the living room and sat in her usual chair, the one that faced the window overlooking the garden. Richard's chair sat across from her, exactly as he'd left it, still holding the impression of his body in the worn cushions. She couldn't bring herself to sit in it, couldn't bring herself to move it, couldn't bring herself to do much of anything except exist in this strange, suspended state between living and merely surviving. The clock on the mantel ticked steadily. 7:30 in the evening, too early to sleep, too late to pretend the day held any purpose. Her phone buzzed, probably her daughter again, calling from Seattle with that carefully cheerful voice that barely masked her worry. Helena let it ring. She couldn't bear another conversation about moving forward, or getting out of the house, or maybe it's time to consider assisted living, as if grief had an expiration date, as if loss could be scheduled and managed like a dental appointment. The buzzing stopped. Silence rushed back in to fill the space. Helena closed her eyes and tried to remember what happiness felt like, really tried, but the memory was elusive, like trying to recall a dream after waking. There had been happiness once. She knew that intellectually. There had been laughter in this house, music, the chaos of children running through rooms, holiday dinners with too much food and too much wine and too much love. But that belonged to a different woman, a woman who still knew how to feel things. The woman sitting in this chair now felt nothing except a profound, bone-deep exhaustion with the sheer effort of continuing to exist. Maybe this is all there is now, she thought. Maybe I'm already finished. The next morning arrived with aggressive sunlight that forced Helena out of bed, despite her best efforts to ignore it. She shuffled to the kitchen, made coffee by muscle memory alone, and stood at the counter drinking it while staring at nothing in particular. The kitchen calendar still showed March, though it was now October. She hadn't bothered to change it. What difference did the date make anymore? Her coffee finished, Helena felt the familiar weight of the day ahead, all those empty hours that needed filling with meaningless tasks. Shower, dress, eat something she wouldn't taste, sit, wait, repeat. But today, for reasons she couldn't articulate, she felt a strange restlessness. Not hope, exactly. Nothing so grand as that. Just a vague sense that if she stayed in this house another moment, she might actually scream. She set down her mug, grabbed her keys and walked out the front door before she could talk herself out of it. The morning air was crisp, autumn-scented, alive in ways that made her feel even more dead by comparison. Helena walked with no destination in mind, letting her feet carry her down familiar streets she'd traveled with Richard 1,000 times. Past the corner market where they'd bought their Sunday papers, past the church where they'd married 42 years ago, past the small Italian restaurant where he'd proposed over undercooked pasta and cheap wine. Every corner held a ghost. She was about to turn back, to retreat to the safe numbness of her living room, when she heard it. Laughter. Real, unself-conscious laughter, bright and warm as the morning sun. Helena stopped. The sound was coming from the park across the street, the one she and Richard used to walk through on spring evenings. She hadn't been there since he died, hadn't been anywhere, really. Almost against her will, she found herself crossing the street and entering through the iron gates. The park was exactly as she remembered. Winding paths, old oak trees, scattered benches, and in the center, a small grassy clearing. But now the clearing was filled with people. Older people, she realized with surprise, maybe a dozen of them, sitting in a loose circle around easels, canvases, and paint supplies spread across folding tables. They were painting, and laughing, and alive in a way that felt almost obscene. Helena meant to keep walking, meant to circle past them and continue her aimless wandering. But her feet had apparently decided otherwise, because she found herself standing at the edge of the group, staring. A woman noticed her first. Tall, silver-haired, probably in her 70s, wearing paint-splattered overalls and an impossibly bright smile. "Hello there," the woman called out, waving a paintbrush in greeting. "Come to join us?" Helena shook her head quickly. "No, I was just—" "Nonsense!" The woman was already standing, already walking toward her, with the kind of confident warmth that felt both terrifying and oddly magnetic. "We always have room for one more. I'm Lucia, and you are?" "Helena," she answered automatically, then immediately regretted it. Now she couldn't just disappear. "Helena," Lucia repeated, as if the name itself was delightful. "Perfect. We've been waiting for you." "I don't think, just paint." Lucia linked her arm through Helena's with casual familiarity, guiding her toward an empty easel. "Have you painted before?" "Not since I was a child." "Even better. Unlearning is harder than learning fresh. Here, sit." Lucia gestured to a folding chair positioned before a blank canvas. "Today we're painting whatever calls to us. No rules, no judgment, just expression." Helena sat because she didn't know what else to do. The canvas stared back at her, aggressively white, demanding something she didn't have to give. Around her, the other painters had returned to their work, their conversation resuming in comfortable waves. She caught fragments, someone talking about grandchildren, another about a recent surgery, someone else laughing about a disastrous online dating experience. They're old, Helena thought with something like wonder, like me, but they're still living. "Don't worry about it being good," Lucia said gently, appearing beside her with a palette of colors. "Just put brush to canvas and see what happens." Helena picked up a brush. It felt foreign in her hand, clumsy. She dipped it in blue paint. Why blue? She didn't know, and touched it to the canvas. Nothing happened. Obviously nothing happened. It was just paint on canvas. But then she moved the brush again, and again. And somewhere in the repetitive motion, something inside her chest loosened just slightly. Not happiness, not even contentment. Just something. A tiny crack in the numbness. She painted for 20 minutes, creating nothing remotely resembling art, just abstract strokes of color that meant nothing and everything simultaneously. When she finally set down her brush, she was surprised to find tears on her cheeks. "That's good," Lucia said quietly, appearing beside her again. "Tears mean you're still in there." Helena wiped her face quickly, embarrassed. "I should go." "You should come back Thursday," Lucia countered. "Same time. We meet twice a week, Tuesdays and Thursdays." Helena stood, ready to refuse, ready to retreat back to her safe, numb existence. But then she glanced around the circle one more time, and her eyes landed on a man sitting across the clearing. He was older, maybe late 60s, with white hair and kind eyes that seemed to see too much. He wasn't painting. He was simply sitting, watching the others with quiet attention, and when his gaze met hers, he smiled, just the smallest upturn of his lips, accompanied by a gentle nod that somehow communicated, "I understand." And for some inexplicable reason, that tiny gesture broke something open inside her. "Maybe," Helena heard herself say to Lucia, "maybe I'll come back." Lucia's smile widened. "Good. Because something tells me you have a lot of beautiful things still waiting inside you." Helena didn't believe her, couldn't believe her. But as she walked back through the park gates and toward her empty house, she realized she was thinking about Thursday, about returning to that circle, about seeing what colors she might choose next time. And for the first time in 8 months, she was thinking about something other than the past. Thursday arrived both too quickly and not quickly enough. Helena spent the intervening days in her usual fog, but now the fog had a strange texture to it, anticipation maybe, though she refused to call it that. When Thursday morning came, she found herself standing in front of her closet for the first time in months, actually considering what to wear instead of just grabbing whatever was closest. She settled on a simple blue cardigan. Richard had always liked her in blue, then immediately considered changing. But she was already late, already second-guessing this entire ridiculous idea, so she grabbed her keys and left before she could overthink any further. The park group was already assembled when she arrived. Lucia spotted her immediately and waved with that same unsinkable enthusiasm. "Helena, you came back. I had a feeling about you." The other members greeted her with friendly nods and smiles. Helena learned their names in a blur: Carlos, Ana, Roberto, Teresa, but the one that stuck was Miguel. He was the quiet man from Tuesday, the one who'd smiled at her. Today he was actually painting, his brushstrokes slow and deliberate, creating what looked like a landscape of some kind. He glanced up when Lucia said her name, and again there was that gentle acknowledgement, that sense of being seen without being interrogated. Helena settled at her easel. The blank canvas felt less threatening today, or maybe she was just slightly less numb. "What are you painting?" asked Anna, a cheerful woman with purple-streaked white hair who'd sat up next to her. "I don't know yet," Helena admitted. "Perfect answer," Anna laughed. "I never know either until it's finished. Sometimes not even then." They painted in comfortable silence for a while, broken only by occasional conversation and Lucia's gentle observations as she moved around the circle. "Helena," Lucia said eventually, pausing by her easel, "tell me what you're feeling right now." "I'm not," Helena stopped. "Tired, I'm feeling tired." "Then paint tired, show me what that looks like." Helena stared at her canvas. She'd been painting dark colors today, browns and grays swirling together with no real form. It did look tired. It looked exactly how she felt. "It's not pretty," she said. "Art doesn't have to be pretty. It has to be true." Lucia squeezed her shoulder gently. "Keep going." Helena did. And something about giving herself permission to paint ugliness, to express the exhaustion and grief and emptiness, felt unexpectedly freeing. She was so absorbed, she didn't notice Miguel had moved until he spoke. "May I?" he asked quietly, gesturing to the empty space beside her easel. Helena nodded, suddenly self-conscious about her chaotic canvas. Miguel sat, not painting, just observing. After a long moment, he said, "I lost my wife 3 years ago." Helena's brush stopped mid-stroke. "Alzheimer's?" Miguel continued, his voice gentle. "So I lost her twice, really. Once when she forgot who I was, and again when she stopped breathing." "I'm sorry," Helena whispered. "Thank you. I'm sorry for your loss, too." He paused. "Lucia mentioned you'd recently lost your husband. I won't ask you about it. I just wanted you to know that I understand why your painting looks the way it does, and that it's beautiful in its honesty." Helena felt tears threatening again. "It's not beautiful. It's a mess. Sometimes those are the same thing." Miguel smiled sadly. "For the first year after Maria died, I couldn't listen to music anymore. I used to be a musician, played piano professionally my whole life. But after she was gone, I couldn't stand the sound of it. Every note felt like a lie." "What changed?" Helena asked, surprising herself with the question. "Lucia," Miguel said simply. "She found me at a concert hall, standing outside, unable to go in. She convinced me to come here instead, told me if I couldn't play music, maybe I could paint it. So I started trying to translate sound into color. He gestured to his canvas, the landscape she'd noticed earlier, but now she could see the rhythm in it, the way the colors seemed to move like melody. And did it help? Helena heard herself ask. Eventually, very slowly. Some days it still doesn't. Miguel met her eyes. But I'm here. I'm still making things. Still finding moments worth experiencing. That's something. They sat in silence for a while, both facing their canvases, not painting, just existing in the strange comfort of shared grief. Finally, Miguel said, I come here Tuesdays and Thursdays, but some of us also meet for coffee on Saturdays. At the cafe near the old theatre. If you ever wanted to join us, you'd be welcome. I don't know, Helena said automatically. That's okay. The invitation stands regardless. He stood slowly, his knees creaking, a sound Helena recognized intimately. It's good that you're here, Helena, even if it doesn't feel good yet. He returned to his easel, leaving Helena alone with her thoughts and her darkly beautiful mess of a painting. As the session ended and people began packing up, Lucia appeared again. Same time next week? She asked. Helena looked at her canvas, at the evidence that she could still feel things, even if those feelings were heavy and complicated and painful. Yes, she heard herself say, next week. And she meant it. The weeks began to blur together, but in a different way than before. Instead of the monotonous, indistinguishable grayness of her previous days, time now had texture. There were Tuesdays and Thursdays to look forward to. There was the gradual evolution of her paintings, still mostly dark, still heavy with grief, but developing something that might generously be called technique. There was, surprisingly, Saturday coffee. Helena had shown up the first time, mostly out of politeness, expecting to make an appearance and leave quickly. But Miguel had saved her a seat. Anna had made her laugh with an outrageous story about online dating at 73, and Roberto had shared photos of his great-grandchildren with such pure joy that Helena found herself staying for 2 hours. She went back the next Saturday and the one after that. You're smiling more, her daughter said during one of their phone calls, her voice careful, as if afraid Helena might spook and retreat back into darkness. I suppose I am, Helena admitted. Mom, I'm proud of you, for getting out, for trying. Helena didn't know how to explain that she wasn't trying exactly. She was just showing up, letting the days carry her forward in small increments, allowing herself to be in spaces where life was still happening around her, even if she didn't quite feel like a full participant yet. But Miguel noticed the changes. Your colors are getting lighter, he observed one Thursday in November, nearly 2 months after Helena had first stumbled into their group. She looked at her canvas. He was right. Where before she'd used only browns and grays, today there were hints of gold, small touches of pale blue. I didn't do that consciously, she said. The best things never are. Miguel smiled. Would you like to see something? He led her to his easel. His painting today was different from his usual landscapes. This one showed a piano, painted in shades of violet and deep blue, with what looked like music notes transforming into birds, flying up and away. I played again, Miguel said quietly. Last week, just for an hour in my living room. It hurt, but it also felt like coming home. Helena felt something catch in her chest, not pain exactly, something closer to recognition. That's beautiful, Miguel. It's progress, he corrected gently. Just like your painting, just like you being here. It's all progress. They stood together looking at their canvases, evidence of their slow, stumbling journeys back toward life. Miguel, Helena said suddenly, would you like to get dinner sometime? Not with the group, just us. She couldn't believe she'd said it. Couldn't believe she was asking. She was 65 years old, a widow, someone who'd believed her story was finished. She wasn't supposed to want things like this anymore. Miguel turned to her with that gentle, understanding smile. I would like that very much. Their first dinner was awkward in the way first dates always are, regardless of age. Helena couldn't remember how to do this, how to sit across from someone who wasn't Richard, how to make conversation that felt both honest and appropriate, how to navigate the strange territory between friendship and something more. They went to a small Portuguese restaurant, nothing fancy, and spent the first 20 minutes discussing safe topics: the weather, the painting group, Lucia's latest, outrageously colorful outfit. But eventually, over wine and bacalhau, the conversation deepened. "Tell me about your husband," Miguel said. Helena hesitated, but there was only kindness in his eyes, only genuine interest, so she talked. She told him about meeting Richard in college, about their small wedding, about raising 2 children in the house she still lived in, about 42 years of ordinary moments that had somehow added up to an extraordinary life. "He sounds wonderful," Miguel said when she finished. "He was. He is." Helena paused. "I still can't quite figure out how to talk about him. Present tense feels wrong, but past tense feels like erasing him." "Then use both," Miguel suggested. "He was wonderful when he was alive. He is still wonderful in your memory. Both can be true." Helena felt tears threatening, but they were gentler tears now, softer than the harsh grief of months ago. "Tell me about Maria," she said. Miguel did. He talked about meeting her at a concert where he was performing, about her loud laugh and terrible singing voice and the way she'd filled every room with life, about watching that life slowly fade as Alzheimer's took her piece by piece. "The worst part," he said quietly, "was the day she looked at me and I could see she didn't know who I was anymore. I was just a kind stranger to her, all our years together, just gone from her mind." "How did you bear it?" Helena asked. "I didn't really. I just survived it. One day at a time, sometimes 1 hour at a time." Miguel reached across the table and gently took her hand. The first time they'd touched. "The same way you're surviving now." Helena looked down at their joined hands, his weathered and spotted with age, hers trembling slightly. It felt strange, but it also felt right in a way she hadn't expected. "I feel guilty," she admitted, "being here with you. Feeling, whatever this is I'm starting to feel, like I'm betraying Richard's memory." "You're not betraying anything," Miguel said firmly. "You loved him. You'll always love him. But Helena, you're 65 years old. You could have 20, 30 years ahead of you. Are you supposed to spend all of them alone because you loved once before?" "I don't know," she whispered. "Neither do I. But I know I'm 79 years old, and I never expected to feel drawn to someone again. And yet here I am, hoping very much that you'll let me take you to dinner again." Helena met his eyes. "I'd like that." They talked for hours, until the restaurant staff began giving them pointed looks. When Miguel walked her home, he kissed her cheek at her doorstep, chaste, gentle, full of promise. Helena entered her house, and for the first time in months, it didn't feel quite so empty. The relationship unfolded slowly, carefully, 2 people learning how to open themselves again. They attended the painting group together, met for coffee most mornings, went to museums, concerts, bookshops. Miguel played piano for her one evening, Chopin, his fingers still nimble despite his age, and Helena cried at the beauty of it. She introduced him to her children during a video call, nervous as a teenager. They were surprised but supportive, her daughter even whispering, "Mom, he seems wonderful. Dad would want you to be happy." Helena wasn't sure about that, wasn't sure what Richard would have wanted. But she was beginning to understand that it didn't matter. Richard was gone. She was still here, and being here didn't have to mean being frozen in grief forever. The group noticed the change. Lucia, especially, watched them with knowing eyes. "I had a feeling about you two," she said one day, appearing beside Helena while Miguel was across the park talking with Roberto. "Is it that obvious?" Helena asked, embarrassed. "Only to everyone," Lucia teased. Then her voice softened. "But Helena, it's beautiful. You've both been carrying such heavy grief. Watching you help each other set some of it down. That's why I do this. That's why this group exists." "I thought it was about painting," Helena said. "Painting is just the excuse," Lucia said. "This is about remembering that life continues, that we're not finished just because we're old or because we've lost people, or because the world tells us our story should be over. You've remembered that, and that's the greatest art of all." Helena watched Miguel across the park, his silver hair catching the afternoon sun, his gentle smile as he listened to Roberto's animated story. She felt something she'd thought was gone forever, possibility. That evening, as they walked together through the park, Miguel said, "I've been thinking about traveling, just small trips, nothing too ambitious. There's a music festival in Porto next month. Would you come with me?" Helena's first instinct was to refuse, to say it was too soon, too much, too everything. But then she thought about all the years she and Richard had planned to travel someday and never had. All the somedays that had slipped away. "Yes," she said. "I'd love to." Miguel's face lit up. "Really? Really? I'm terrified, but yes." He laughed and took her hand. "Being terrified means you're alive." They continued walking hand in hand, two old people who'd stumbled back into life when they'd least expected it. Spring arrived with defiant optimism, painting the park in flowers and new green. Helena had been attending the painting group for 6 months now. 6 months that had somehow transformed her from a woman who'd thought her life was over into someone who woke each morning with purpose. She'd gone to Porto with Miguel. They'd held hands at concerts, drunk too much wine, laughed until their faces hurt. She'd met his children, visited the cemetery where Maria was buried, helped him plant flowers on the grave because that's what love looked like, honoring the past while living in the present. Her relationship with Miguel had become something steady and real. They hadn't moved in together. Both treasured their independence too much for that. But they were together most days. He played piano while she painted. They cooked meals in companionable silence. They talked about everything and nothing. And yes, they were intimate. Hesitantly at first, then with growing confidence. Helena had forgotten that her body could still feel pleasure, that desire didn't have an expiration date, that being old didn't mean being dead. Miguel was patient and gentle and delighted by her, and she found herself delighted in return. Life, it turned out, wasn't finished with her yet. "I have an assignment for you," Lucia announced one Tuesday morning. "I want everyone to paint their most honest truth. Don't think about what it should look like. Just paint what your heart needs to say." Helena stared at her blank canvas, considering. 6 months ago, she would have painted darkness and grief. 3 months ago, maybe confusion and tentative hope. But now, she began to paint. The image emerged slowly. A park bench, the same style as the ones scattered throughout their park. In her original vision, she'd meant to paint it empty, a memorial to loneliness. But as she worked, flowers began appearing. Small ones at first, then more, until the bench was surrounded by blooming color, reds and yellows and purples and blues, impossibly bright, almost defiant. On the bench itself, she painted 2 figures, small, impressionistic, barely more than shadows. But they were there, together, present. Miguel appeared beside her as she added the final touches. "Helena," he breathed, "that's beautiful." She stepped back, looking at her work. It was beautiful. Not in a technical sense. She was still learning, still clumsy with the brush, but in its truth. "It's me," she said quietly. "The empty bench was me 8 months ago, but the flowers are now. They're you and Lucia and this group. They're my children calling more often. They're waking up without dread, their possibility." "And the figures on the bench?" Miguel asked. Helena turned to look at him. "That's us. Still here. Still blooming." Miguel pulled her close and they stood together, looking at the painting that represented Helena's impossible journey back to life. "I love you," he said quietly. Helena's breath caught. "I love you too. I didn't think I'd ever say that to anyone again." Neither did I, but here we are. Here they were indeed, 2 old people scarred by loss, learning that love didn't follow a schedule, that life could hold multiple chapters. That 65 or 69 or 72 or any age wasn't an ending but possibly a beginning. When the painting session ended, Lucia gathered everyone together. "I want to celebrate Helena today," she announced. 6 months ago, she wandered into this park looking like she'd lost everything. And she had lost something precious. But look at what she's found, or rather, what she's created. She's created a new life. She's shown all of us that it's never too late to begin again. The group applauded, and Helena felt tears streaming down her face, but they were good tears now, grateful tears. "Thank you," she said to Lucia, to all of them. "You saved my life. You showed me it wasn't finished. We didn't save anything, Lucia corrected gently. You did that yourself. We just held space while you remembered how. That evening, Helena did something she'd been avoiding for months. She went home and finally opened the box she'd hidden in her closet, the one containing Richard's things, his watch, his wedding ring, his favorite cardigan that still smelled faintly of his cologne. She sat on their bed, her bed now, and held these objects, letting herself feel the grief fully, not trying to push it away or paint over it or move past it, just feeling it, honoring it, acknowledging what she'd lost. I miss you, she whispered to the empty room. I miss you so much. But Richard, I'm still here, and I'm trying to figure out what that means. She thought about Miguel, about the painting group, about the version of herself who'd stood in the bathroom 8 months ago, staring at pill bottles, convinced her story was over. I met someone, she continued, speaking to Richard as if he could hear. His name is Miguel. He's kind. He's gentle. He lost his wife too, so he understands. I think you'd like him. I hope you'd want me to be happy. The room remained silent, of course, but Helena felt something shift inside her, a final release of guilt, a permission she'd been waiting for, but realized she had to give herself. She carefully packed Richard's things back into the box. She wouldn't throw them away. They were part of her story, part of who she was, but they didn't have to define who she'd become. She took out her phone and called Miguel. "Hello, my dear," he answered, warmth in his voice. "Can you come over?" Helena asked. "I want to show you something." 30 minutes later, Miguel stood in her living room, looking at the photographs on her walls, at Richard young and old, at her children growing up, at a life fully lived. "This was my life," Helena said. "This was my story, and it was beautiful." "It's still beautiful," Miguel said. "Yes, but it's not finished." She took his hand. "I'm not finished. We're not finished." Miguel pulled her close. "No, my love, we're just beginning." They stood there, surrounded by the past but firmly rooted in the present. Two people who'd learned that life could hold both grief and joy, memory and possibility, endings and beginnings. Outside, spring continued its patient work, covering the world in blooms. And inside, Helena felt something she hadn't felt in months. She felt alive. Not the old alive she'd known with Richard. Something different, something new, something entirely her own. She was 65 years old, and her story was far from over. 1 year later, Helena stood in front of her finished painting, the one she'd worked on for months, the one that had started with that empty park bench and had slowly, carefully evolved into something more. The bench was still there, but now it sat in a garden exploding with color. Every type of flower she could imagine, rendered in bold, confident strokes that spoke of growth and healing and defiant joy. The two figures remained on the bench, clearer now, recognizable as an older couple, holding hands looking toward a sunrise painted in golds and pinks. "It's finished," she said to Miguel, who stood beside her. "It's perfect," he agreed. They were standing in a small gallery. Lucia had organized an exhibition of the painting group's work, and Helena had nervously agreed to include her pieces. She'd never imagined anyone would want to see her paintings. But here they were, hung on white walls, lit by gallery lights, being admired by strangers. Her daughter had flown in for the opening, standing with Miguel's son across the room, chatting like old friends. Her grandchildren had sent a video message of support. Life had grown fuller, richer, more complex. "When you started painting," Lucia said, appearing beside them with champagne, "you painted grief, and that was honest and necessary, but look what you're painting now." Helena looked. She'd painted a series over the months, a visual journey from darkness toward light. The progression was obvious, even to her untrained eye. She could see herself healing in brushstrokes and color choices. "I never thought I'd be here," Helena admitted. "Standing in a gallery at 66 years old, showing my paintings, dating someone, traveling, living. That's the beautiful lie we tell ourselves when we're grieving," Lucia said. "That it's over, that we're finished." "But Helena, humans are resilient creatures. We heal. We adapt. We bloom again, even when we think we can't." Miguel squeezed Helena's hand. "Thank you," Helena said to Lucia, "for that first day, for inviting me to paint, for showing me there was still life waiting." "Thank you for being brave enough to try," Lucia replied. "That's the hard part, showing up even when you're certain there's no point." As the evening continued, Helena moved through the gallery, accepting compliments with growing ease, talking to strangers about her work, feeling proud of what she'd created. Near the end of the night, she found herself back in front of her bench painting. A young woman stood there too, probably in her 30s, staring at it intensely. "It's beautiful," the woman said without turning. "It makes me feel hopeful, like maybe difficult things don't last forever." "They don't," Helena said gently. "They change. They transform. They become part of your story instead of the whole story." The woman turned, and Helena saw tears in her eyes. "I lost my father last year. I felt so stuck, like I'm waiting for life to feel normal again, but it never does." Helena recognized that expression. She'd worn it herself not long ago. "Normal doesn't come back," she said honestly. "But something else does. Something different, but potentially just as beautiful. You just have to be patient with yourself while it arrives." The woman nodded, wiping her eyes. "Thank you, I needed to hear that." After she left, Miguel appeared at Helena's side. "Ready to go home?" he asked. "Yes," Helena said, then corrected herself. "Actually, let's go to the park first. I want to see the real bench, the one that started everything." They walked through the quiet evening streets, hand in hand, until they reached the park. The bench was there, exactly as it had always been, empty in the moonlight. Helena sat down and Miguel joined her. "1 year ago," she said, "I walked past this park and heard laughter and thought it was obscene. I couldn't understand how people could be happy when I was so destroyed." "And now?" Miguel asked. "Now I understand that happiness and grief can coexist, that healing doesn't mean forgetting, that I can love Richard's memory and love you simultaneously. That being 66 isn't an ending, it's just another chapter." She leaned against Miguel's shoulder, feeling the solid warmth of him, the reality of this new life she'd built from the ashes of the old one. "You know what Richard would say?" Helena continued. "He'd say I spent too much time worrying and not enough time living. He'd be glad I found you. He'd be glad I found myself again." "I think he'd be proud of you," Miguel said. Helena smiled. "I think I'm proud of me too." They sat together on that bench, the one from her painting, the one that represented both loss and renewal. As the moon rose higher and the park settled into comfortable nighttime quiet, Helena thought about the woman she'd been a year ago, the one who'd dropped a pill bottle and stared at her reflection and couldn't remember what happiness felt like. That woman was still part of her, would always be part of her, but she wasn't that woman anymore. She was someone new, someone harder and softer simultaneously, someone who'd learned that life was more resilient than she'd imagined, that love could surprise you at any age, that it was never, ever too late to begin again. The park bench was no longer empty, and neither was she. As they stood to leave, Helena took one last look at the spot where she'd first heard Lucia's laughter, where she'd first picked up a paintbrush, where she'd first met Miguel's understanding eyes. "Thank you," she whispered to the park, to the universe, to whatever force had led her here. Then she took Miguel's hand, and together they walked into whatever came next, blooming. If you made it this far, don't forget to leave your comment, your like, and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss any new stories. Thanks for watching and see you soon.